Oh, hello. I'm the host now. Let's admit everybody. All right. Okay. Hi, everyone.
Hello.
Looks like we got more people arriving. So I'll just wait a minute or two. Holy moly, like so much snow. Oh, man. Lots of snow. I got to go shovel my neighbor's driveway after this. So that's going to be fun. Get out there and get moving. It's nice after you've been inside and it's been raining and kind of, bleh.
Sir, you should turn on the news. It might make your day.
Yeah, I've been following actually before I opened up Zoom. I was just scrolling through the news feed on my phone. Yeah. Action is being taken to remove the occupants from downtown, which, finally. Yeah, and like as Silken says, crazy. The change of temperature was crazy too. I can't imagine this is going to make things easier for the police and everybody down there. One of the things I saw somebody who was making like a snow barricade. So yeah, I don't know. Like the news has been saying, everybody don't go downtown. There are checkpoints set up. If you don't know, there are actual checkpoints, and you can go downtown if you have business downtown, like if you live there, if you got to go to work or get food. But maybe don't, because the police are there and they're going to begin to remove the occupants, and we don't know if there could be something that goes down, maybe some violence or whatever. You wouldn't want to get caught up in that. I saw that, Aaron. Why a boat? I mean, I joked about this on social media I saw on social media when everybody was posting memes before the, so-called convoy arrived. People were posting photos of lots of trucks and claiming like 50,000 trucks, like an outrageous number of trucks. And a lot of these photos, by the way, were not real photos. They were from other convoys, one image was from Virginia a few years ago. Different convoy, that's just one example off the top of my head. But I started joking with my friends that, oh yeah, it's 50,000 trucks and all of the airplanes too. And all of the trains, just all the vehicles, and maybe it's coming to fruition. They're bringing boats now, although I suspect it's going to be difficult to get more boats in downtown Ottawa with all these checkpoints. It's absolutely nutty. So my point is, stay safe, stay away from downtown. If you're in town, don't go into the the zone or whatever it is, the red zone. Or whatever it is that they've called it, because the law enforcement, men and women in law enforcement, have some work to do, right? So also depending on how everything goes, I'm hopeful that we can return to in-person lectures after reading week, which is this week coming up. So we got a week off, and then maybe we can go back in person if all of this is cleared out, so stay tuned to my announcements. Yeah, me too, Zoe. Like I want to, especially a class like this, because you guys always ask really good questions and there's always some really good discussion happening. And that's just more fun to do in person. So yeah, I really hope we can get back to in person soon, but we're only going to do it if it's safe. So if these guys are still occupying downtown. We won't, but I can't see that happening now that police action is being taken. So I guess we'll see what happens. I'll definitely be watching the news right after this. Well, after I shovel my neighbor's driveway. But let's get to learning about the grand illusion again. Oh, I have to share my screen. Always forget something. As a mid-30-year-old, I get this is true. Adults get, 1 or 2 good nights of sleep every month. And I think I had my good night of sleep last night, which nice. So this should be fun. What am I doing? Oh yeah, from current slide. That aside, I'm still, I don't know, maybe I need more coffee. I'm sitting here wondering what buttons to push. So we were talking about this chapter, The Grand Illusion, which starts out with a little bit of Alvin Noé's ideas. The Grand Illusion, remember, refers to the idea that everything you're seeing is not the world as it is, right? Think about realism, right? We've talked about realism and idealism before. Idealism is when, things are mind dependent, right? You need, oh, Tula, shush. Sorry, my dog's barking. Like this green pen, right? This green pen, does it really exist? Well, in my mind, if you're like a Berkeleyan idealist or something, but if you're some kind of realist, a realist about the external world, you think that there is an external world out there that exists independently of the mind. There's a couple of varieties of realism too. One is called direct realism. Sometimes this is called naive realism. And this is the idea that we're actually seeing the world as it is. Like, this is what this green pen really looks like. But that can't be the case, can it? Well, I don't think so. I mean, I'm not seeing the pen. I'm seeing by virtue of light reflecting off of the pen, which has different wavelengths, and therefore I can see different colors, different shape of the pen, right? But I can't be seeing the pen as it really is. And you could do experiments with this, right? You could like dip the pen in a cup of water and see the light refracting, and change the way the pen looks going in the water. So that the pen looks, different out of the water than the part in the water looks. You wouldn't look at that and go, oh, that's the way the pen really looks, right? So yeah, that's naive realism. That's indirect realism in contrast to direct or naive realism. Oh, hi, Toots. So that's the grand illusion, is this kind of indirect realistic realism sort of way of understanding our perception of the world, our visual experience, as sort of like a virtual reality simulation that our brains are putting together of the real world. Think again, and yes, there are some worries of Cartesian materialism here, but think again of the guy in the robot analogy, right? Choose the the giant robot of your choice and imagine the pilot is like the mind. That's Cartesian materialism, homunculus fallacy. But what he sees on his screens, what he or she sees on those screens, is not the world as it really looks. It's as it's presented to him or her. That's the grand illusion. But then there's a new skepticism. The new skepticism, Noé says, is skepticism that our brains are doing that at all. Noé is going to go ahead and say, along with thinkers like Kevin O'Regan, that perception is actually like a type of action. that we do that involves mastery of what they call sensory motor contingencies, ways in which our senses respond to stimuli that have to do with how we kind of navigate around the world. So perception isn't something that happens to us. It's something that we're like actively doing. So we'll get to that, but that's the new skepticism. Anyway, the grand illusion, there are a couple threads to unravel, and this is roughly before where we left off. One idea is that there's this rich stream or snapshot of conscious visual impressions, right? Stream of consciousness, we talked about that. Damasio's movie in the brain. Crick says the vivid picture of the world we see in front of our eyes. These are all kind of, for Dennett at least, problematic because of Cartesian materialism, the commitment, the tacit commitment to dualism that's present in these sorts of accounts. And the other idea, not just that there is this stream of consciousness or something happening, is that the world is represented, right? Am I looking at the pen right now? Is the pen what I'm experiencing? Well, I guess according to this idea, no. This is a mental representation of a pen. In the same way that the pen you're seeing on the computer screen is a digital representation of the pen. What I see, what I consciously experience, is a mental representation of the pen. So, as we talked about last time, this is not a new idea, right? Da Vinci, good old Leonardo da Vinci, thought of the eye as a camera obscura. I've got the wrong word here. It's not lucida, it's obscura, because darkness. Like a pinhole camera, which we talked about last time. You can use a pinhole camera to take a simple picture. You could use a pinhole camera with some modification to watch an eclipse. We were talking about that last time. So Da Vinci made that analogy, and really it's quite an apt analogy because the eye is a pinhole camera. Kepler made some contributions toward understanding the optics of the eye, how light travels into the eye and it's kind of refracted back and hits the retina. He figured that out, but he didn't know how these mental representations were, quote, made to appear before the soul. Descartes tries to solve that problem with his dualism, right? He says that, well, these impressions, these sense impressions, I don't think he used that word, sense impressions. That's really more of an empiricist term. But anyway, these sensible qualities, or whatever Descartes would have called them, eventually get to the pineal gland. And that's where they're available to the soul, because that's kind of like the interface for Descartes between soul and body. How does that work? Ultimately, how does the immaterial soul receive these physical material images? And then how does the immaterial soul affect the body, which is material? Well, he doesn't really answer that. He just tells us where he thinks it happens, which is the pineal gland. So you might not be a dualist, right? You might not be a Cartesian, you might not be trying to be a Cartesian materialist, even if you're definitely not a Cartesian. You might still be a Cartesian materialist, Dennett would say. But let's bracket that for now. These ideas that, there's this sort of stream of something happening visually, that there's a richness to our visual experience, and that this is a representation in our minds. These ideas seem intuitively true. For me, the direct realism stuff is especially appealing. I have to admit, I'm biased toward this. This is a theory of the mental that I first learned about when I was actually pretty young. I used to read a lot of science books, right? So I've been thinking about the mind this way probably since I was like 12 or so, when I was reading books about like dreams and stuff and how those work. So I guess I got a bit of a bias, which might be why I find Noah's ideas kind of tough to get my head around, but we'll see. But perhaps you are maybe really maybe your intuitions really mesh well with the idea that perception is like a snapshot or a video, and it's rich and detailed. Or maybe both of these are very intuitively appealing to you. Maybe both of them seem to accord with your experience. But, and this is kind of one of the things that Dennett's all about showing us, is that these ways of thinking actually pose some problems for thinking about consciousness, right? We could, if we wanted to, maybe just accept these ideas as true. Grant that there is a stream of consciousness, a snapshot of reality, and that's what our visual experience is. And then we could look for the neural correlates of those experiences. But this would be a fool's errand if it turned out that there wasn't actually such a stream of consciousness, or if perception wasn't like a snapshot or a video. If there's no, Cartesian theater where everything comes together, then we would be looking for something that we're never going to find, right? The neural correlates of visual experience will not be what we think they are if visual experience is an illusion. So this is what we have to think about. And this was the point of the monkey business illusion, which we watched together last time, right? Some of you didn't notice the gorilla. Some of you didn't notice the curtains changing color. And that's inattentional blindness, right? That was because you were focused on counting the passes that the black and white teams were making. So, that just goes to show you that, if you yourself have succumbed to that illusion, then, it shows you that, well, maybe my visual experience isn't rich. Maybe it's not like a snapshot. Maybe my visual experience, maybe I'm not really representing everything going on in my visual world because I didn't notice that gorilla. If I didn't notice it, was my brain representing it and I failed to notice the representation? Or did my brain just not represent the gorilla? Right? I mean, what? I don't know. These are the questions we have to think about. This is why this is so fun. Drew, go ahead.
Does this kind of tie into like higher order thinking and higher order perception? Or sorry, yeah, higher thoughts and higher order perception? Because like if our brain prioritized counting, then that would be the higher order thought. And if our brain prioritized like seeing the passes, that would be the higher order perception. So does like hot and hop theories have to do with like our visualization?
I think they could have something to do with it for sure. And I think this is illustrated by, driving examples, when you're kind of on automatic pilot and you stop at a red light, and you're doing this the entire way home, you're stopping at the red lights. But when you get home, you're like, I'm home now. And, so were you not conscious of the red lights? Were you representing them, but not conscious of them? Maybe you were representing them, but they weren't fully conscious because you didn't have the right kind of higher order thought or perception, right? So yeah, you're right. Exactly. This, this, you can definitely assimilate what we're talking about into those theories of perception too, or consciousness, I should say.
Perfect.
Yeah. So William James, back to William James, who's always got something really interesting and helpful to say. He noticed that when we're looking around the room or around anywhere, we can't take everything in all at once. But on the other hand, there doesn't seem to be any gaps in our visual experience. He says, quote, "It is true that we may sometimes be tempted to explain or exclaim when once a lot of hitherto unnoticed details of the object lie before us, how could we ever have been ignorant of these things and yet felt the object or drawn the conclusion as if it were a continuum, a plenum? There would have been gaps, but we felt no gaps." How do we reconcile this? How do we reconcile this? Our knowledge, if we think about it, we know that we can't possibly be taking in every detail all the time, but it doesn't seem like there's any gaps in our experience. How do we reconcile that? Maybe the brain fills in the missing bits. But then we have to answer questions like, how does the brain know how to fill in the gaps? Is there a who that the brain is doing this for? Is there a self in there somewhere that your brain is doing this for, right? And why? It's confusing. Or maybe there's no need to fill in anything. These gaps.
How does the brain know that something's missing, though, if it doesn't know it's there?
Right? That's what I'm saying. Why would the brain fill in? And this is the debate we're going to get to, is whether the brain is filling in or not. Some thinkers like Ramachandran think, yes, the brain is actually filling in gaps in perception with qualia. Others like Dennett are going to say, no, there's no need for any filling in. It's all just multiple drafts, right? So, but that's why this is perplexing, right? If my brain is filling in a gap, who is it doing it for? And how does it know to do that if it doesn't know there's a gap, right? Very confusing. But maybe the gaps are not information about absence, right? It's just an absence of information, right? Maybe that's why we don't go around with like gaps in our visual experience, like when we saccade, right? When we do this, our sort of visual memory is overwhelmed with details when we're doing this, and it's overwhelmed to the point where nothing really makes it to the visual cortex. But we don't, the world doesn't blink on and off when we make saccades with our eyes, right? Or as we'll talk about in a moment, the foveal blind spot. Or here's a good one first, actually. A car parked behind a tree, right? Is your brain filling something in there? So you're standing, let's say, I'm here and there's a tree in front of me. Just imagine this pen is a really big tree. And behind the tree is a car. We'll say it's my phone. Now, from your perspective, it's backwards. So, here's the tree and here's the car. I know this is a terrible example, but, just have to imagine. Or go outside later. If you go outside and find a car that's partially obscured by something, you don't look at it and go, oh, there's half of a car or there's two ends of a car. No, your brain understands that there's an entire car there. It's just that some of it is behind the tree, right? This is kind of like a conceptual filling in, right? You don't experience the car as just a bunch of parts of something. You understand that the car is a car, an assemblage of metal and wheels and all kinds of stuff, right? Oh, no problem, Iman. Oh yeah, and Andrew, yeah, don't worry if you drop out of class like because of the internet and you come back, it's no big deal. Don't worry about it. I understand the internet connectivity issues, technical glitches, they can be a thing. This is also why we record the lectures, right? If you miss anything, you can just go and look it up later on YouTube. So yeah, as I was saying, I mean, if you see one object behind another object, you don't think like, oh, it's half of a car or half of a person or something over there, right? You understand it's the whole thing because of this conceptual filling in. There's also the foveal blind spot. This is tricky to do. I would try and do this if you can print this image out. It's easier to do it this way. But I can explain what happens if everybody watches my screen. So I'll just minimize myself. So what you have to do is kind of hold this in front of your face such that you're looking at the black dot here, right here, with your left eye, and you want to keep your right eye closed. And you want to position this such that your screen, your piece of paper, whatever, is about, I'd say, maybe 15 degrees. Oh, that was weird. I lost the black dot in my blind spot. That was weird. If you position this right, the white circle in the middle will disappear and it'll seem like these black lines are filled in. I'll try it one more time, see if I can do it. Let's see if I'm looking at that. Oh, damn, there. Oh, yep, found it. That is so weird. Oh, that is so weird. Yeah, so you want to hold your computer or your screen roughly in front of your face, close your right eye, look at the black dot with your left eye, and you want to move this around, and eventually you'll find that this gray circle in the middle right here disappears and it's filled in the black lines. That's because there's a blind spot on your fovea where the fovea is at the back of the retina, like a hole in the like there's a blind spot by your retina. The optic nerves leave the retina at this point. So we have a blind spot in each eye. And you don't notice it unless you do something like this, right? Zoe found it. Donovan cannot find it. Keep trying if you want, Donovan. It's tricky. I would say I'm closing my eye like this and I'm holding my screen like, roughly right in front of me. The first time I did it, though, I got it wrong, and I actually made the black circle disappear. Oh, that's weird. I wonder why that happened. It might be easier, like if you're using a small screen, like a phone, it could be difficult to do this. Larger screen, like a laptops are easy because you can pick them up and kind of move them like this, right? Or a piece of paper, you can print this out later. And there's other ones too. You can just copy them right out of the textbook and print them and try them until you mess up your perception, right? But that's the foveal blind spot. So you actually don't have any receptors. There's no photoreceptors there. Rods and cones, none of it. Yeah, it's tricky. It took me practice. Like I find because the blind spot is kind of off center. If you hold that's why you have to hold it right in front of your face. Close your right eye, and then your left eye is looking at the black circle, and you're just going to kind of move it around until the gray circle disappears. There's other kinds of filling in. Let's do one that's not as I might have an example that I can pull up on the internet real quick. Just to illustrate filling in, just to illustrate this idea of filling in. How do I unfull screen myself? Okay, so if I go over to the internets, F11. Oh, thanks, Zoe. I used, what did I use? Oh, the Windows button. Yeah. So I'll pull this up on my screen. I'll just find an example, nice example. This is an example that Dennett uses, and I've used this in some of my other classes. Here's a nice one. So this is the neon color spreading illusion. I think I've used this exact picture actually, but you see all these black lines against a white background, and then you can see here the lines turn to blue. But does anybody see a blue circle? You can see, it looks like there's a blue circle here.
Was gonna say, like, it looks like an outline of a blue circle. Like, if you look at the edges, you don't see a hard edge, but then if you abstract everything, it kind of looks like a faint blue circle.
Yeah, like very faint, similar to the lines in the cube that we looked at last time, right? So it looks like people could see that, right? But there is no circle. It just, the lines just turn blue, right? Yeah, so is that a kind of filling in, right? That's another kind of filling in, maybe. So Okay. Let's go back here. Move everything around here. Whoop. Okay. So maybe we're maybe we're filling in, maybe our brains are filling in the gaps, like I said a moment ago, where the optic nerves leave the retina, we have a blind spot in each eye. But excuse me, like William James said in the quote that I read earlier, we don't really notice these gaps in our experience. So is the brain really doing some kind of filling in? Christoph Koch thinks so. He actually writes that unlike electronic imaging systems, the brain does not simply neglect the blind spot. It paints in properties at this location using one or more active processes such as completion, interpolation, and filling in. So Christoph Koch thinks, oh yeah, the brain is filling in some stuff, but Daniel Dennett disagrees. Here's Daniel Dennett. Here's a bunch of Daniel Dennetts. Drew, go ahead.
So how much of a representation is it if like we have the ability to move our heads around? So like we're getting the actual information one way or another. There's just a constant blind spot, but that like the information that's in that blind spot is possible to be filled in with just a 15-degree turn of the head. So how much of it is inference and how much is it just memory of perception?
Well, I can't really, I mean, if the brain really is filling in, I wouldn't be able to tell you the degree to which some of it is like unconscious inference or filling in. I suspect that if the brain is filling things in, it's a bit of both, right? Similar to the photoreceptors in the retina, right? We don't have color receptors around the edges of our visual field, but we don't see around the edge of our visual field in black and white. So, how is that working? The brain could be making unconscious inferences, like hypothesizing about the world, and then constantly testing its inferences against what it's actually getting or what it has from memory. So it would be a very complicated process that I wouldn't be able to do justice to here. If indeed there is filling in going on, is the key thing, right? I don't know. Next, in the summer, I'm teaching a neuroscience class in the cognitive science department. Maybe this is a question I'll try to answer there if anybody wants to take a neuroscience class. I don't know. How'd you like that, eh? A philosopher teaching neuroscience. That's what a time to be alive. So here's Daniel Dennett, or a bunch of Daniel Dennetts. So if you glance at this image, are you really maintaining detailed mental representation of dozens of Dennetts? Well, Dennett would disagree. Dennett doesn't use pictures of himself. Dennett uses like Andy Warhol paintings. Like imagine an Andy Warhol, just all Marilyn Monroe by Andy Warhol, right? Do you perceive all the Marilyns? Yeah, Devil Dennett. You wouldn't perceive all the Marilyns because vision can't work that way, nor would you perceive all the Dennetts. You would notice salient differences like Devil Dennett over here. Remember, he's the devil. But that's not because there's a snapshot in the head, right? It's just that, if there were no devil horns here, there'd be no information to suggest that what isn't in your foveal view, that sort of sharp, the best sort of spotlight of vision, right? So it just seems to you that your brain is representing many detailed Daniel Dennetts all at once, even though you're not. Someone had their hand up again, I think. Donovan, go ahead.
Yeah. I mean, like, if you have like any experience in like any field of like computer science, this makes sense because like if you like this image, right, is essentially an array of pictures where every single picture has the exact same like components except for one. And so if you were to create something like this in a computer program, right? You just build one image and then copy it across the whole array, with the exception of like row 2, column 2, which you specifically set to be different. It's like the same principle. It's much more efficient than like individually creating an instance of every single picture.
Yeah, and I think that's what Dennett is suggesting here, is that the way you just pointed out, like if you were to make a computer that would create this image, you would want to do it simply like that. Our perceptual systems are also computational, according to the computational representational theory of mind. So they're going to also try and do things as efficiently as possible. It's just that there's no programmer saying, do this with this image. They're getting their information from the environment, our perceptual systems, that is. So yeah, and I yeah, like when I'm looking at this, I'm like, okay, let's say I look at this Daniel Dennett right here. I'm not really focusing on the details of all the Dennetts over here, but I have no reason, or my brain has no reason to assume, based on what it can see over here when I'm looking here, to assume that any of these are different, except for this one, which is obviously different. So that's very efficient. So my brain isn't really representing many detailed Daniel Dennetts all at once. It just seems as if that's what my brain is doing. But at lower levels of processing, maybe the brain is doing some sort of filling in. There's isomorphic filling in. There's examples in Blackmore, and this is similar to the foveal blind spot exercise we did. Only in the blind spot, some people have additional blind spots beside the foveal blind spots. These are called socotomas. And this could be due to like an injury, you know, usually it's like an acquired brain injury or something. So isomorphic filling in occurs when, you know, maybe there's maybe your images of some lines, you know, could be like lines at a 45-degree angle, and then there's a blind spot, and your brain fills in the same form, isomorphic, same form. It fills it in with lines or with static or with whatever. It kind of takes what's there and fills in the blind spot. And there might be different mechanisms for different things, right? Ramachandran and Gregory in a paper, a 1991 paper, found that there might be separate mechanisms for filling in color, filling in texture, and maybe even movement. And we've even done this with text. In people that don't have socotomas, we can do this with text thanks to eye trackers. If you ever have the chance to use an eye tracker as the experimenter or as the participant, you should. Drew, go ahead.
There's some crazy crap I saw on the internet. I forget which app it was, but there was a movie watching app, and they were talking about like you could watch ads for like to get more movies or something, but the ways that worked was it tracked your eye movement to see if you were actually watching the ad, which is some crazy dystopian shit, but
yeah,
is quite reality, unfortunately.
Very Black Mirror.
Yeah.
That's interesting. Oof, yeah, I wouldn't want. Yeah, no,
I don't want that kind of eye tracker.
Yeah, no way. That's too personal. But with an eye tracker in a scientific lab, we can do really fun experiments where, you know, your foveal view is not that large. It's maybe a few words wide. So we'll give somebody some text, and the eye tracker does it so that when you're reading, the bit that you're reading is consistent. But as soon as your fovea moves off of what you're reading, the text turns to nonsense. So it's as if it's a page of nonsense. Here's a book, you know, just words. Oh, this is mostly pictures. So imagine all of this is just word salad, except for the bit that you're reading. And people sit down, even Daniel Dennett. There's a story of Daniel Dennett who participated in one of these experiments, and he's reading on the screen, and he's like, okay, guys, when does the experiment start? And it's like, oh, we're doing it now. You know, didn't notice that the text that was not in his foveal view was changed. So we can do this with eye trackers. We can do this with people that have injuries, all kinds of cool stuff. Also, change blindness is fun. Let's do change blindness. Who can spot the difference between these two pictures? I know they're a little grainy. Drew, go ahead.
Oh, the branch.
Yeah, the
Simon typed it in the
branch.
chat. I was muted. Thanks,
Oh,
Simon.
no worries. Yeah, the branch. Okay, let's try another one. This one's a little trickier. All right.
I found something.
Yeah.
I think the entire turbine's gone in the first image.
Yep. That's right. The engine here, you can see, is missing. It's not here. See, it's been cropped out. Also, a little bit of a difference in size, but that's fine. One more. Who's got their hand up? Let's see. Zoe and Donovan and Drew. Okay, who can spot the difference?
All of the people that are in the shadow are gone in the first image.
Right. Yeah. So everybody's okay. So that's pretty good. It took a bit of time for the second and third images, but that's normal. This is called change blindness. You know, in this situation, what makes this difficult is that you're saccading back and forth looking for differences. But in a lab, what we would be doing is presenting one image after the other, followed by a screen, you know, just static, right? Or a blank page. And we'd flip back and forth until you found the difference. And that's change blindness. That's similar to inattentional blindness, where we don't notice things we're not paying attention to. We can also not notice small changes if they occur, especially if they occur when a saccade is made, right? And we can do this with an eye tracker. When the eye tracker sees that you've saccaded, it changes the picture. You don't notice the change because your visual memory is overwhelmed when you do this. So eye tracking, boom, change the picture. You don't spot the difference. You're looking around, boom, you look again, it changes again, changes back. You don't notice, right? Because we are led to believe the brain does not represent a detailed snapshot of the world, right? And we've even done this, you know, scientists have even done this in like almost comical sort of experimental setups. Like this one, right? So here's one experiment, and this is some Three Stooges shit. This is funny. The person is talking to the woman. Typically, you'll do this on like a university campus or something, right? So this woman here is a naive participant. She doesn't know she's in an experiment. This guy comes up. He's a Confederate. That means he's like in on it. He's part of the experiment. So he's asking her for directions. Then these two gentlemen carrying this door pass between them, you know, excuse me. Of course, they do it so that they're both on this side. So the woman can't see. She can't see what's going on behind the board. So as they pass by, this guy switches places with this guy. So you can see they both have hats. They both have pieces of paper. So they're going to walk by between the gentleman and the woman. And then this guy is going to switch places with this guy. And the experimental participants often will not notice that they are talking to a different person after the change is made, which is just funny. You know, it's funny, like psychologists, they claim they're doing science, but a lot of the time, like, look at this, they're just messing with people. Like, it's funny. So that's an interesting example of change blindness. And as I explained a moment ago, you know, when our eyes saccade across an image or in the real world, the amount of information swamps transsaccadic memory. So that's why we have a difficult time, as I explained a moment ago. You know, if we're looking around or saccading back and forth, and a change happens during a saccade, we have a very difficult time finding the change. And we've already seen inattentional blindness, right? Inattentional blindness, example of the invisible gorilla. This is from a paper called "The Invisible Gorilla Strikes Again," you know, this one is actually pretty scary. This could have some real world consequences. So Drew and colleagues in their 2013 paper inserted a gorilla into these CT scans of lungs, of human lungs. And they went to radiology conferences and they would have trained radiologists. So these are doctors, X-ray specialists, you know, they specialize in reading X-ray images, CT scans, you know, any picture we take inside the human body with radiation, they can read it. And they're looking for images or signs of lung cancer. So the task is identify like cancerous tumors, nodules, whatever. So many of them miss the gorilla. Can you find the gorilla? I mean, keep in mind
Yeah, I found it.
Yeah. Okay. Right here, right? Anyone who hasn't seen it, they could see there. So they were not told that there was a gorilla in the image, of course, yet they did miss it, right? That's inattentional blindness. And this is kind of scary because, I mean, if you can miss a gorilla, maybe you can also miss a tumor. So, you know, this is why we develop expert systems. This is why we're using, I mean, look, an expert system is some kind of computer program that one of the first things we did with them was train them on diagnosing diseases. Because medical doctors get it wrong more often than you think. And now we can even use computer vision, neural networks and visual search and all of that to search through these images and catch things that human doctors might miss, right? There's also magicians, of course. Magicians are really good at exploiting inattentional blindness. Here's Penn and Teller. They're a couple of my favorite magicians. I mean, I don't know if any of you have favorite magicians, but I do. I saw them live once, and it was so great because I felt like I was a little kid again, you know. Teller did this trick where he's making coins. It's called producing. He's producing coins, you know, volunteers sitting there and he's producing the coins and dropping them into a fish tank. And the last thing he does is grab what you think is a coin and put it in the tank. And then boom, there's all these goldfish swimming around. And I was just like, oh, gasp. It was so cool. So magicians do this. They use inattentional blindness. When they do an illusion or a trick, we call that the effect. And the means of achieving that is called the method. And what magicians are really good at is they use misdirection, which is all about taking advantage of inattentional blindness. And they use misdirection so that you see the effect, but not the method. And I have an example that we could watch together. Let's open it up. Might take a minute to load, but hopefully everybody can see my screen. Just pause it so it can load. Get it loading. There we go. If memory serves, this is from Penn and Teller Fool Us, which is a fun show. If you like competition shows, it's a show where other magicians come and try to perform a trick that Penn and Teller can't figure out. And if they can't figure it out, then they win and they get to go and open for them at their show in Vegas, right? So, back over here. All right, so I'm going to full screen this. So sharing my screen, so you should be able to see this.
I'm not getting any audio.
Oh. Sorry.
We're not getting any audio.
Sorry, Zoe?
We can't
We
hear
have
it.
no audio.
Oh,
hear
okay.
anything.
All right. Well, tell you what, maybe it would be best just to click the link and watch it on your own. I'm not really sure. Yeah, why wouldn't there be? I guess I'm not. Oh, maybe it's because of the way I'm doing this through my audio interface. Well, it's okay. You can watch this on your own. Basically, I'll give you the lowdown, but do watch it after class. They do their cup and ball routine. But the cool thing about Penn and Teller is that they will design tricks that they will then show you how they're done. And this is one of them. They'll do a cup and ball routine where they're making cups, making balls disappear and reappear under cups. But then they do it again with transparent cups. And you actually get to see all of the misdirection and sleight of hand, which is really cool. So take a look at that after class, if you are so inclined, if you want a really cool idea of, to get a really neat idea of inattentional blindness, beyond just invisible gorillas and whatnot. So this all really challenges this snapshot perception of perception, the stream of consciousness conception of perception, right? So then why does visual experience seem detailed and rich in the first place? Well, maybe one explanation is that we really do have a rich experience, between visual saccades. And this kind of gives us the gist of the scene, kind of gives us a basic picture. We don't perceive the world in such a way when our eyes are saccading around, but the gist of the scene maybe remains the same, because our perceptual systems, because our perceptual systems just don't assume that major details have changed. And this is similar to what Dennett suggests. So we don't notice changes unless they pop out, like if one of your Daniel Dennett's has devil horns or something, right? Ronald Rensing thinks that we never actually form a complete representation of the world, right? He thinks rather visual representations of objects happen one item at a time. And while we're focusing our attention, what's actually happening is that we're bringing proto-objects in our perceptual field from low-level processing into a higher-level coherence field, he calls it. So this is a type of higher-level representation. This is really kind of a higher-order thought theory or a higher-order perception theory. This higher-level representation of a coherent scene gives us an illusion of a rich, continuous visual representation of the world, even though anything that we're not really focused on is sort of like a proto-object of perception.
What is it?
Oh, Zoe?
Lobby. Yeah. Okay. Sorry, I also use some eggs, so
What's that?
pretty sure that I bought eggs. Eggs.
I
took from the one that didn't have your writing on it, and I think that one's mine. All three of them. All three of them. I'm pretty sure I bought at least one, but if not, then sorry, I only took 2 eggs. So I'll buy some more.
All right. So
yeah, I just wanted to double check.
So where are we? Sorry. Visual. I just got a little distracted there. Sorry. This higher level representation of coherent scene. Where was I? Stop paying attention. Oh yeah, this is a virtual representation. Is kind of what he calls it. So this reminds me of Dennett. It's kind of like what Dennett says, where you kind of have a representation. It's not detailed, but it seems detailed because your brain just doesn't have any reason to think that it's not. Do you know what I mean? So yeah, no worries, Zoe. I thought you were asking me a question at first, and then I realized you were talking about eggs and stuff. So no big deal. No big deal. Don't worry about it. Kevin O'Regan, who's done a lot of work with Alvin Noe, doesn't think our brains create internal models of the world. And this is the new skepticism, right? This is what I kind of started the chapter off with, the new skepticism. Yeah, roommates, eh? I don't miss roommates. Well, I had one good roommate one time, my best buddy. Had a cool roommate that I lived with for a few years. He was awesome. And now I guess my girlfriend is my roommate, which she's the best roommate, obviously. So no internal models, right? No, no grand illusion, but new skepticism, rather. Our brains don't create models of the world at all. What? That sounds like direct realism, if you ask me. And this is why I'm kind of like, when it comes to Noe and O'Regan, I'm kind of like, what? But I'm going to try to charitably present the ideas to you. So O'Regan and Noe and thinkers like that who argue for a theory called inactive perception, they argue that we use the world as its own model. The world is like an external memory. So in the 2001 work, O'Regan and Noe proposed a theory of vision where perception, as I said earlier, is something that we do. Perceptions aren't something that we have. They don't happen to us. They're something that we do. And this is a sensory motor theory. The sensory motor meaning it has to do with both sensation and movement of the environment and within the environment. They call it inactive perception. Perception is something that is enacted by our moving and sensing around an environment. And when it comes to that, sure, I agree. It's this whole world is its own best model business. I'm not quite sure how to interpret that. Does that imply direct realism? Maybe it doesn't have to, but I don't know. I'm never sure if I understand this or if I'm just building a straw man out of it and knocking it over. So instead of building internal representations, Noe and O'Regan would say, when we're seeing, what we're doing is acting, right? They say seeing is a way of acting. It is a particular way of exploring the environment. Maybe. Come on, slides. I think we're getting close to the end here. It's counterintuitive, but this is how O'Regan and Noe think it works. An organism has the experience of seeing, visual experience, once it's mastered and is deploying sensory motor contingencies. What are sensory motor contingencies? I'll read a quote from Blackmore to explain. That is, when it develops the skills for extracting information from the world, for interacting with the visual input and exploring the ways in which that input changes with eye movements, body movements, blinks, and other actions. What you visually experience is what you visually manipulate, quote unquote. It's just that our visual experience does not feel this way. So we need an example. What's a good example? I guess this art behind me. I got a tapestry on the wall here of a tree with many colors in it. For some reason, this reminds me of the mind. That's why I like this. It reminds me of the mind. The branches are like neurons, you know, and all the colors are like all your neurons firing, and it's kind of cool and pretty. So what am I doing when I'm seeing that? Well, according to Noe and O'Regan, I'm not having this passive experience of it. What I'm doing is looking around and using my sensory motor contingencies, my sort of mastery of how I can use my eyes and body to position myself to experience the thing. It's like I'm visually manipulating it, but it doesn't seem that way. In the same way, it's you know, like the refrigerator light illusion, you know, that's the analogy that O'Regan draws here, is like every time you open the door of your refrigerator, the light is on. So, you know, you close it and you'd be like, well, I bet that light is still on. You open it and it's still on. So you'd be tempted to think that the light in your refrigerator is always on if you didn't know any differently. But of course, the light is off, right? So it seems like I have this continuous, rich movie or snapshot of the world, but it just seems that way because I'm deploying my sensory motor contingencies that I've mastered when I have a visual experience. And if I'm not doing that, I'm not having a visual experience, right? That's the idea. And this may sound radically counterintuitive. And that's because this is a very different kind of theory. I don't know how this is supposed to really work, though. Is my experience of, and this is one of the reasons I'm like, what? Is my experience of that blue, that color is blue, this is orange and yellow, this is green, and this is reddish pink as a result of my mastery of sensory motor contingencies? Really? What? How does that make sense? Okay, now I'm being full on uncharitable, but I don't understand how that's supposed to work. I don't understand how this theory explains those aspects of perception. As Jesse Prince says, do we smell different smells differently? does perfume smell differently based on how I smell it, how I deploy my sensory motor contingencies? Does a rose smell different? A rose by any other sensory motor contingency would smell just as sweet, possibly. I don't know. This is why I have trouble with this. I just don't know how this is supposed to explain certain aspects of our visual experience. Fine, visual experience is an illusion. Yeah, okay, cool. But how does this explain my distinguishing between the colors? Doesn't matter how I look at the thing. The colors are the colors that they are because of properties in the environment. It has nothing to do with how I'm looking at them. So I don't know. I hope I'm not being uncharitable, but I find this very strange. But maybe you understand it and maybe it makes sense to you, and that's fine. Right. So this is the sensory motor theory, or inactive perception. It's a very different kind of theory of visual perception, for sure. You're not the only one, Ayman. It's fine. I mean, what did I say, right? Blackmore starts this book off by saying, you better be prepared to be perplexed. But yeah, this is confusing. I am genuinely confused by this theory. And I took a bunch of courses on consciousness. I read these papers. I thought about them. And I'm still kind of like, I mean, sure, visual experience is illusory to a certain extent, but is it a kind of action? In some respects, yeah, but it seems like Noe and O'Regan take it to an extreme that I guess I'm not comfortable following them to that extreme, where all visual experience is just deploying these sensory motor contingencies. So yeah, I don't know. Don't worry if you're confused. I'm confused too. What you need to understand about their theory. Oh, Drew, go ahead.
Do they have like theories that relate this to other forms of sensory perception, or is this just visual?
That's a good question. I'm actually not sure. I should look into that.
Is it how we touch differently? Is it how we hear differently?
I think that they primarily concentrate on vision. Most philosophers do, which is kind of unfortunate.
But I mean, that kind of just like digs them into a corner where they're just talking about one of the senses only.
Yeah.
And
yeah.
One sole sense does not make up the entire sensory experience.
I agree. And their argument may even work better if they didn't use vision as an example. But I don't know. I mean, again, like, I'm trying to be charitable, but like I said a moment ago, I think they take this to an extreme that just doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
But like, there could be a grain of truth to what they're saying. Like, yeah, how I move around the environment does affect my perception to some extent, but that can't be the whole story. It's got to be a bit of both. There's got to be a bit of mental representation. Like the world is its own best model. What does that mean? How can that be the case? Like,
right off the bat, that messed me out. The world is its own best model. Like, that was not cool. And like, I think it's definitely like a synthesis between like how what we are perceiving is being perceived and how we perceive what we are perceiving. Like, there's a dance of two people. Like, this is kind of just imposing that it's just one of those things and kind of eliminates the other actor in the equation.
Exactly. It's like we started with the visual snapshot or the mental theater, which is one extreme, and this is the other. And I don't think it works either. I think somewhere in the middle is the truth, where, okay, I can use the world as its own best model, but I still have to be representing the world. If I'm not, that's naive realism, and that doesn't. What? Are we really going to be naive realists? Like, I can't do it. So I don't know. Interesting topic for critical response, for sure. If anyone wants
naive
to.
Realism also sounds kind of oxymoronic. Like, yeah.
Yeah.
I'll leave it at that.
Well, it's like, okay, like if I don't know if this is a first year class, so I don't know if any of you have read any Kant, but I'm talking about this a bit in my other class too. Kant tries to unify rationalism and empiricism, right? Rationalism says that knowledge comes from the intellect. Empiricism says it comes from the senses. Kant tries to have his Copernican revolution in metaphysics and unite them by saying, okay, look, here's what happens. There's the world of things in themselves, noumena. Our mind cannot know the world as it is. The mind has to kind of like, things coming in from the world are filtered by the mind, if you like, or given structure by the mind, by the forms of sensible intuition, which are space and time. That's right. For Kant, space and time are not features of the world. They're ways the mind makes the world make sense to us. And then you also have your categories of understanding. Quantity, solidity, different properties, different sorts of primary and secondary qualities that objects can have, right? So Kant is not understood as an indirect realist, right? He's a transcendental idealist. And this gets into all of this transcendental aesthetic stuff, which we're not going to talk about that. He's not a Berkeleyan idealist, right? He's not a Berkeleyan idealist. He's a transcendental idealist. Different thing. But what Kant ends up with is like, if I ask like, what does this pen really look like? That's meaningless. I cannot know the thing in itself. I can only know about the phenomena, the appearances. And the appearances are the way they are by virtue of the forms of intuition and the categories of understanding that are in my mind. And I'm very comfortable thinking of perception that way, in a way like that, in a direct realism, transcendental idealism kind of way. So that may not be the whole story, but it's kind of where I'm starting from, right? So Drew, go ahead.
My hand was up from a while ago.
Oh, sorry. See, inattentional blindness. I wasn't looking, so I thought your hand had gone down and gone back up again. I'm not representing the world, damn it. Okay, so Noah and O'Regan are not saying that. They're saying vision is a kind of action, right? And it's if vision is a means of action, which, if that were true, would challenge our experiences of, what it's like seeing in the world. But we don't know. We don't know if this is right or not. Wah! Okay, we don't know if this is correct or not, but we do know that the appearance of, this rich thing cannot be the real story. Ben, you had your hand up there for a sec.
Yeah, it was a general observation though, so I can wait until after you're done this slide.
Oh, well, all I was going to say is that that's it for this chapter. The next section, which will start after reading week, is section 3, which is all about the self. And this is fun. This is when we get into, the self is an illusion. Free will is an illusion. We're going to talk about a lot of fun stuff. The next chapter, chapter 7, is called Egos, Bundles, and Multiple Selves. And we'll talk about different theories of the self. And we categorize them into 2 camps. There's ego theory, which says that the self is a whole unit, the self is this actual entity that continually exists over time. There's an I, an ego. And then there's bundle theory, where the self is not really a bundle. The self is not really an ego. It's a bundle of different things. So here you get things like Buddhism, or a lot of the work of Derek Parfit. Even David Hume. David Hume was what Parfit calls a bundle theorist. But the Buddha was probably the first bundle theorist, because he was like, oh man, the self, it's an illusion. He didn't say it in English, but you know what I mean. That was the Buddha. That was Siddhartha Gautama. And if the teachings of Buddhism are right, the Buddhists were like the first bundle theorists. So we'll learn about that next time, and it'll be really fun. Okay, that's it. So Ben, if you wanted to go ahead with your observation.
Oh, I just wanted to say I've noticed like a lot in philosophy that like a lot of philosophy I find like I really enjoy philosophy, but it's sort of like uninformed empiricism. And I just wanted to say I really like this class because it's sort of always tied to like some form of science.
Yes.
And I think that makes it a lot more like real to understand, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I appreciate that, Ben. And I try to do that because I think philosophy should be empirically informed. And also probably like, you know, by training, I'm a philosopher and a scientist. Like I've kind of got one foot in each camp, right? So if I didn't talk about the science, it almost feels like I'm not doing my job. And also, what was the other thing? The other thing was that, you know, think about what we're talking about here with visual illusions and stuff. Like philosophers often use things like introspection and thought experiments to argue, and that's fine. But if we're mistaken about some aspect of our own experience, then we might be led to the wrong conclusions. So that's why you should also pay attention to the empirical stuff. And everybody should keep that in mind. I think if you're going to stick with philosophy, make sure you understand, make sure you know how to understand and interpret empirical claims, empirical studies. Make sure you can do that. If you are going to be a scientist, make sure you pay attention to asking fundamental questions and exploring the concepts and intuitions and beliefs that are motivating your work. So all good philosophers should do some science. They should be scientifically literate. All good scientists should be somewhat philosophically literate, I think. Ben, go ahead.
Sorry, I meant like not empirical, but I meant sensory. Like a lot of philosophy is like reason from the senses, and like not that that's bad. That's good, but I think it's also good to realize, as we discussed, that your senses aren't always reliable, and that, you know, there's better ways to get information. So
that's true. Yeah, I agree with, I still agree in that case. Yeah. So that's it. That's it for today. That's it for now until reading week. Until reading week is over. So remember, I think later today or final reading responses due. Zoe, go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to ask, so there's the Cartesian theater, like sitting inside, experiencing things, and like they all come together in sort of this pilot in the mecha robot. And like I that description, it kind of like feels like you talked about this, but that's like the intuitive kind of route that a lot of people go down. But as you've been explaining, the opposite more, like as particularly the last point with Dennett and the blind spot, I found like with blind spots, like I always thought that blind spots were filled in because we literally didn't see them. It's like cutting out a part of film and just stitching the two ends together. That's how I thought blind spots were filled in.
Yeah.
But then some people describe them more as like holes where we fill them in like a pothole.
Yeah.
And so thinking about it in like those different ways, it kind of then like reinforces the idea that we aren't in a Cartesian theater. And so I liked hearing about that because like intuitively I started with the Cartesian theater, and then hearing the other stuff and like especially why intuitively the Cartesian theater is what most people go to first, I was able to like think about some of the other perspectives, especially the decentralized point of view, but also then just like hearing about blind spots, then especially like, I don't know, I really like the way Dennett explained blind spots, which is just like they aren't there, they're a gap, and we can't experience them if they're not there. So
yeah, exactly. And you know, like you say, like we all come into a class like this with our beliefs and our intuitions, which may be derived from experience, and the whole point of this chapter is that our experience is so misleading. And so even if like thinking about something like inactive perception, for example, even if that theory is incorrect, or even if you find it incredibly confusing, you should still think about it because it gets you outside of your experience. It busts your intuitions, and that's important. So yeah, I think that others should try and kind of take your lead on this, and don't be afraid to sort of think outside of the box that you're used to being in when it comes to thinking about perception and intelligence and cognition and all of this fun stuff, but especially consciousness, right? Because that's why we're here. Yeah.
Yeah, I was gonna say, like, I notice especially a lot with some of these ideas, it's just kind of like they almost seem not constructive because they don't tend to really like describe or add anything really provable. But what they do is they like dispel a lot of the like common myths that
Mhm.
people have about the mind and experience and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And I don't know, I feel like a lot of these are really hard to understand because it's almost like talking to Socrates. You'd be like, oh, isn't this how the mind, isn't this how we experience the mind or consciousness?
Yeah.
And philosophers go, not exactly. And they go, well, how do we experience it? And they go, I don't have that answer. I just can
Yeah.
tell you it's not.
Exactly. Yeah. And that's fine though. That's kind of the point, right? What else did Socrates say? You know, if I'm the wisest man, it's because I know that I know nothing, or I know what I don't know. This stuff
Yeah.
makes you realize what you don't know, and then you can start learning.
I was gonna say it is really helpful to like kind of just think about consciousness from the very beginning because there's a lot of like some people immediately jump to like consciousness versus unconsciousness versus other people jumping to like different levels of cognition. It's nice to just start at like a baseline, which is like, okay, what is attention? What is
Yeah.
memory and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Anyways.
And Blackmore's got, that's why I like this book. She's really good at that. You know, every section is linked together with a theme, and each chapter kind of deals with everything one at a time. Good book. So it's 12:55, so I think we'll wrap it up. Thanks everybody. This was another fun one. This is definitely my favorite class right now. I love teaching about consciousness. It's a lot of fun. And I always learn something every time I do it too. So, you know, reading week is here. Enjoy your reading week. Stay safe. Keep an eye on updates over reading week. You know, I'll provide some updates about whether we're going back to in person. I suspect we probably will be able to, as long as the situation downtown is resolved, which it's looking like that's finally starting to happen. A couple of the leaders were arrested yesterday, and my Schadenfreude level went up. So it's good. Remember, these organizers are not reputable folks. They're not upstanding people. These are understatements. Yeah, the organizers of this aren't, you know, whatever you want to say about the people that got caught up in this. Maybe some people are legitimately angry and frustrated, and I get that. But they are being taken advantage of by some bad people. So, you know, hopefully this gets resolved, and stay safe in the meantime. I'll see you all after reading week, and, you know, any questions at all, email me, talk to me, get some rest, relax if you can. You know, it's reading week. All right, I got a driveway to shovel. I'll see you all next time.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye for now.